Gen Xers, we are here once again for another excellent show of GenXTalkin on being prepared. Now today we're planning on doing things a little bit different with the show. We're going to introduce some of the more common occurrences in the world of preparedness, and we'll do it through a story. We're going to introduce a new series of episodes called Storytime that focuses on perhaps not so fictional account of a person, a family, a community facing challenging times. The idea is we'll tell a brief story as an introduction, and then Ed and I will discuss some questions near the end and thoughts about the story and how we might be able to help others respond in those type of situations. Sure. My name is Matt Marshall. I'm just your overall preparedness enthusiast. Just checking in for the day, introducing my co-host today, Mr. Ed Wasson.
I'm Ed Wasson. Thank you for inviting me on again, Matt. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I'm going to go ahead and start with the story, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Let's do it. Let's hear this story you got for us, Matt.
For our imagination, training, and planning today, let me introduce you to a married couple, Daniel and Elsie Gardner. Now, Daniel and Elsie, for most of their lives, have lived in some Western or some mid-Atlantic states in the U.S. They've got 3 great kids, teenage years. After some planning and some very hard work, it's paid off, and they've found their place at the end of a long road in Florida, just outside Orlando. Very private, quiet. Now, Daniel grew up most of his life in a preparedness-minded home. The pantry was well stocked. Small supply of water was properly stored. There were secondary ways to get power and purify water if needed. His parents taught him from a young age that the way of the scout was to be prepared. Elsie was always a city girl and grew up knowing the power would always be there, and thought there was a fine line between prepping and hoarding. To Elsie, keeping a significant amount of food and water stored was pretty wasteful, and when you could just as easily go down to the market and pick up the fresh food. And besides, it was so much healthier, right? Well, preparedness had always been a minor point of contention in the household, and the kids felt it whenever Dad would attempt to build a stock of food or water or take part in any of these type of activities. Mom would get frustrated. Daniel and Elsie have now lived in Florida for about 6 months. And although they've heard about hurricanes in Florida, they've never experienced the real threat. In fact, the only real experience they've had was when they lived in Maryland, and one superstorm skirted the area, causing some wind damage and minor flooding. Nothing major. Back in Maryland, anytime any type of wind or storm, superstorm or not, would come up, about 2 days before the storm, everyone would race to the store and stock up. Often the shelves would be left empty until after the storms. Well, August rolls around, and seemingly out of the blue, the news starts reporting about a Hurricane Eton heading their way. As reported, the storm is still about a week out, so Daniel and Elsie continue their work. Coworkers seem to be only slightly alarmed, but enough to make Daniel start thinking back to his upbringing. On a whim, he decides to stop and pick up 10 of the gallon-sized bottles of Crystal Geyser water and a couple of cases of smaller water bottles. Heck, while he's at it, he goes ahead and he picks up some rice, a few extra cans of soup, just in case. He just keeps them in his car for now. A couple more days go by, and reports are getting worse. The strength of the storm intensifies, and by landfall, it's expected to be at least a Category 3 and possibly Category 4. Looking at the projected path of the storm only frustrates Daniel and Elsie as they try to decipher what it could mean for their small family. Some news broadcasts are indeed calling for evacuation of areas to the south and to the east of their home, but not necessarily their area. Confusion sets in, and after some time, the couple starts to argue about how they should better prepare. 2 days out from the storm, Daniel thinks they should go buy a generator. Elsie argues that's overkill, but as they see their neighbors start applying their hurricane shutters on their windows, Daniel starts to ask around. for more recommendations on how to prepare. They start to ask if the house they purchased has pre-made shutters for their windows. You can often find them stored in an attic or a basement somewhere, or you might still be able to pick up some plywood and clips at the hardware store before the storm. You might want to get those well before the storm. Do you have a generator? That would be important. Extra gas cans? How much food and water do you have? Last big storm took us out for about 5 days. 5 days. We better get moving. With this information, Elsie was convinced. They needed to get out and pick up some things. The next day, luckily, they found the house did indeed have some fitted plywood sheets already cut to their window sizes, thank God. And next, Daniel decided to take a trip into town to look for a generator. As he passed through town, he noticed that all the buildings had metal shutters installed and locked into place. The town looked like the set of The Walking Dead. Grocery stores shuttered. Post offices shuttered. 2 places remained open. Gas station, but the line there was over a block long, and the hardware store. He pulled into the parking lot and walked into the store. And as with the grocery store several days prior, many of the shelves were bare. The only generator available was this little 1200 watt that might power a couple of lights and a charger. Daniel bought it and remembered he still had some oil he could use back home. On his way home, Daniel parked in the line to get gas. He waited for 2 hours listening to his podcast. When he got to the point to fill up his car, it was running on fumes. And he asked the attendant if they had any gas cans he could buy. Nope. And we wouldn't let you fill them up anyways, just your car. Daniel filled up his car's tank and headed home. As he pulled up to the house, Elsie ran out to meet him, crying, "It's picked up power off the coast. It's a category 5 and headed our way." Now, less than 24 hours before the storm hitting the coast, Daniel and Elsie and their young family have limited supplies, equipment they've never used, and the threat of an impending storm. They feel woefully unprepared, but reports indicate the evacuation routes are clogged with last-minute travelers trying to get away. Ed?
Yep.
What do you think?
First of all, I think it's a very realistic story, and I think I'm really glad you brought this up. It's probably actually fairly common for something similar to this scenario to be affecting a family. And as a matter of fact, when I was thinking about it as I'm listening to you read it out, I'm wondering if this actually isn't something very similar happened in real life to somebody you knew, and you kind of pieced it together from that. So very realistic. And I think the scenario laid out presents itself to a lot of talk as an exercise as to how to be prepared, because it's actually a very common thing for a storm like a hurricane on the coastal areas of the US or a huge tornado inland to devastate an area. And I'm talking like it, what happened in New Orleans earlier, like what it was about 10 years ago, Houston, about 5 years ago, 2 major hurricanes there, but we've seen tornadoes go through as well that are, it's not a storm. I mean, this thing's going to level a section of town and literally kill people and barnyard animals and wild animals and destroy the infrastructure. And you're talking about that area is, first of all, you're going to be dealing with casualties. Then you're going to be dealing with the destruction, and the infrastructure is going to be down and things like that. And then that greatly affects your supply logistics chain as well. When the storm hit Houston about 5 years ago, up in the Dallas area, we couldn't get gas for about a week. Didn't have anything to do with Dallas. It didn't even touch. I mean, it just affected mostly Houston as far as the storm's immediate effect on the area. But I had friends down there that they never really got their houses back. It was completely flooded out. They basically had to cash in on insurance and go get a new home after it was all settled. But that was like almost a year later. You go up the road and you got all these evacuation routes going to the north, and you've got San Antonio, Austin, that whole area all the way up to Dallas. You can't get any gas for about a week. We had to buy our gas from portable tankers that were selling the gas for about $1 extra a gallon, and they had limited supplies. So they're saying like, you have a limit of like 5 gallons. So
were these like little pop-ups where they park at the gas station or on the side of the road somewhere, or how that
the way I was able to get gas, I'll have to try to look it up, but I did it twice. I had about 3/4 of a tank in my truck before all this happened. And of course, I wasn't thinking anything about it because I'm like, well, if it hurricane hits Houston, I ain't got nothing to do with Dallas.
Yeah, right.
And it was, to be honest with you, it's kind of bizarre because so there's a huge logistics and supply hub for an entire region out of Houston. But I thought, well, that the storm is going to hit in this area. And if it's going, you can anticipate it's going to affect that logistics and supply chain. Why not start having your other stuff from West Texas or Oklahoma start coming down to try to help alleviate the situation? But our gas stations were, I ain't kidding, our gas stations were out of gas for 3 or 4 days. And then it was off and on for 4, 5, 6 days. But anyway, I was able to get gas because I had to keep going to and from work because we had all of our power. We had all of our infrastructure. There's no change in pace in our work, our life and work and everything else like that. So I'm going back and forth to work. I need gas in a couple of days. And at work, we were able to, we had this app on the phone where this roving vehicle with a little tank on it, they ended up going a couple of times up to Oklahoma, I believe, to get filled up. And they would come into our work area. And if you had the app, you had to have the app because they charged through the app to your bank.
Oh, wow.
And they said, okay, we're here today. If you need gas, here's your chance to get it. We can only distribute like 5 gallons per vehicle.
Per
that was
vehicle,
wow.
Yeah,
that was the first time. So that lasted me about 2 trips. And then on this 3rd or 4th day, I had to fuel up. By that time, I was able to get, I believe that they filled it up because that company typically wanted you to fill up. They wouldn't give you anything else but a fill up.
Oh, okay.
But the first time they limited it. And I was like, man, this is rough.
Yeah.
So, it's a realistic scenario. There's real people that are going through this real dilemma every year. If it's not a hurricane, it's a tornado. We've seen the tornadoes go through. So it's a really realistic scenario. I think it's going to open up to a lot of thinking and discussion and planning and preparation. So I'm eager to talk to you about how we should plan and prep the discussion on that part.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's a few key areas that they missed going in. And that's when you move into an area. This is one of the things we've talked about in past episodes. But when you move into an area, the National Risk Index, right? You can look up your new area on the National Risk Index. You can try to garner from that what that area is most at risk of. And they would have very quickly, in fact, everyone knows that just about all of Florida is known for its hurricanes, and there is a hurricane season. And that would be the first thing, is just looking up on the National Risk Index or other sites, local sites, whatever it may be, to find out what those timelines look like. Right. When is hurricane season? How long does it last? What's the potential this year of hurricanes coming? But you can do that in any area you move to. Heat waves down in the south, or cold waves, what are they called? Those big thunder or storms, the
Oh, they've got,
squalls and things that come in the Northeast,
yeah, we got the blue northerns that come through once in a while
Ah,
through from about the Lubbock Amarillo area down. I think they call them blue northerns, something like
yeah.
that.
So every area has something like this. And I think although the risk index may tell you from a general perspective what statistically things could look like, researching information like that locally, I mean, you kind of need to do that if you're of any preparedness minded, thought.
Yeah.
So I think that's number one thing this family could have done to prepare. One of the questions that I had is, what challenging times have you had to discuss preparedness with your spouse? And for us, it was back in 1990, 98, 99, leading up to Y2K. I've talked about it a little bit before about kind of how that changed things in our minds, my family. But it was a big challenge talking to my wife. How are we going to change things? How are we going to adjust the way we talk about preparedness? How are we going, what are we going to change? Are we going to set up a pantry that has additional storage space or whatever it may be? So I think that's a big part that was missing from that relationship between the mom and dad characters, Daniel and Elsie, in the story. So what discussions have you had with yours?
Well, we've been discussing it a lot more frequently lately. And when you and I first started discussing this kind of like a project for this thing, um, specifically related to the scenario, I'll say, first of all, that in the age of information, ignorance is a choice. So that's the first thing I think everybody's got to realize is the information is out there. And in this day and age, almost everybody knows a few things about weather and weather patterns. I think it's the National Hurricane Center. There's weather tracking centers. They track hundreds of tropical storms throughout the Caribbean every year.
Yeah.
So they know what the frequencies and patterns and everything are. Their reporting is fairly reliable as to where, at tracking a storm anyway. It's harder to predict exactly where it's going to hit land. How strong is it going to be? Because it could be a Category 5 hurricane when it's way out to sea and then just fizzle out before it hits land in one of the Caribbean islands, or that whole region, even throughout the north part of South America. That whole region experiences hurricanes every year.
Yeah.
Since we've been in Dallas, we've seen that hurricane situation in Houston, the deep freeze earlier this year, and 2 tornadoes have come through and wiped out whole sections of neighborhoods not too far away from us. So number one, ignorance is a choice in the age of information. Number 2, these types of storms are a frequent reality. Number 3, you do have to broach the topic and you do have to be slightly prepared. I would say we weren't unprepared, but we weren't as prepared as we could have been. I think if we felt there was a pending Cat 5 type of storm coming to us, we would track it better and take better measures. But when we started talking about this project, Matt, I started pulling out gear from all over the place because we just moved in the house a couple of years ago, so I've got gear in the garage. I've got gear in the shed. I've got gear in my closet. We've got a couple of extra bedrooms. And Nisha came home one day and I had everything stuffed in the closet, and I'm going through all this stuff. So I've got my safe, I've got my firearms, I've got my ammo, I've got my water and my water purification and my medic bags and all this stuff. And this is like, what the heck are you doing? There was no discussion. And I just told her, I told her, I'm getting my stuff together because I don't know what's going on out here, because it's not just a hurricane or a storm, but anymore these days, you never can tell what's going to happen if there's any type of news incident in your area, mass shooter, somebody got shot, and right there in your area, no matter who's at fault or whatever, somebody blows it up into a panic button and they hit the social justice button. And the next thing you know, you have Antifa and others coming into your area, and they're practically trying to burn down your neighborhood for something you don't even know what the heck is going on. That's a reality these days in America. So we were watching, like I said, ignorance is a choice. We're watching the news. You started talking about this project. I gathered my stuff. I got it ready. It's already, I started talking to Nisha, and we were tracking a lot more of these things a lot more closely. So as far as your story goes, I know those people are out there. I think there's so many points to talk about with this, because the man or whoever, there has to be a leader of the situation, and they have to tell you this is the way it's going to be, because I'm anticipating this much threat or risk, and I'm making this assessment, and we are going to get ourselves this ready. That's all there is to it.
I would wholeheartedly agree. Although I would say, it's interesting, because as I started getting into the podcast and just in general trying to put together some more organization to preparedness, I started looking up other social media accounts, and just kind of going to the watering hole, figuring out who else is talking about this. And I found some interesting ones that some would think, well, the man has to do this. The man has to take control or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, that is absolutely not the case. There's a couple of Instagram accounts that I follow on a regular basis, RoguePreparedness and Muthaprepper. Both of them, it's obvious that the gal is kind of leading the charge in preparedness, and she's constantly showing how she's organizing things, how she's the coolest thing is some of them are actually like really. There's another guy in the UK, Mudgley Father, where he's taking his kid out camping all the time and going through all these, like showing the little baby, like, I don't know, it must be 3 or 4 years old, showing him how to make fires and things like that. It's really quite impressive. But anyway, so it could be anyone in the family that just finally says, it's time for us to start. So
yeah, I agree. It was easy for me because of my military background, and with that, Nisha was just like, okay,
let's do it.
But like you said, it's just one of those things you just want to communicate about, because there's a lot of badass soldiers and Marines out there, all military types, that are the ladies, and they're leading the charge in a lot of things now, more and more. So you're going to see more females going through infantry school and other things like Ranger school and airborne school and stuff like that. And I'm going to be interested to see how quickly and aggressively and enthusiastically they're going to be picking up on those, like, infantry tactics, the survival and the preparedness type stuff, because it's really fun. Anybody can do it. And as we saw when, you got Boy Scouts, and we see kind of, they're like floundering and faltering a little bit now, but the Girl Scouts are out there and they're still taking names, and the Girl Scouts are doing very well. There's a lot of good judgment and initiative on their part. So I'm kind of excited to see what the lady police officers, first responders, military personnel are going to start bringing to the table, leadership wise, when it comes to prepping.
Yeah, absolutely.
Number one, I'd say the information's out there. Please try not to be ignorant. Number two, it can happen in your town.
Yeah.
Number three, try to be at least a little bit ready for anything. And don't shun being prepared.
No.
Embrace it.
This is one of the things that I've talked about on a couple of other posts that I've done. And that's, a lot of people think that I think it's because of the doomsday preppers and those shows that we've seen out there where they seem like they're kind of nutty people, and they really have gone a bit off the deep end. I hope, I truly hope that stereotype has gone away, because after a year like we've just been through, year and a half, 2 years that we've just been through with the pandemic, if you weren't prepared, I mean, how could you be thinking it's not a good idea to be prepared at this point,
Yeah. And whether it's left or right, I get a little bit of distrust in the government. That's
Sure.
just going to be a given. But whether you trust them or not is not as relevant as being prepared and realizing you're in charge of
Yeah.
the safety and security of yourself, not the government. You can't count
Of
on the
yourself,
government.
your family, even
Yeah.
partly your community,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
Number one, you're going to have to take that level of responsibility and accountability to yourself. You're beholden to yourself and your
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
And number two, especially as Gen Xers, we have the life experience. You're going to have to realize that you can't just be prepared for yourself. You're going to have to, it goes to one of your other questions that you had down there. You're going to have to be prepared for others, and you're going to have to prepare a little bit to lead. So if you haven't taken a Sigma 6 problem solving type course or a leadership course in wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, I would encourage our listeners to start thinking about leadership as well, because you're going to be one of the leaders. People are going to be looking up to you. You're going to be one of pretty much the elders, whether they know it or not, or like it or not. They're going to say, well, I'm 20, 25 and I don't have a degree yet, but you can't just discount my experience. Well, we're in this situation now and none of us have much experience in it. And this is the way we're doing it because I have this experience in planning and prepping and organizational leadership. So we're just follow my lead and don't fight me on it. And we'll get through this.
Yeah, right. What were some of the things you think that were good that they did leading up to the storm?
Well, another thing we did touch on is knowing alternate routes of escape. But that was one other thing because the scenario was, now you're at some point in time, in your scenario, you said now all these routes are clogged up as well. So you got to know your alternate routes. But, he was planning and prepping a little bit. They were tracking it a little bit. And they've probably got just enough stored up from what he had been doing to last at least hopefully a few days before they start getting really uncomfortable. But as far as I can tell, that's about as much as I could say that they did right or good. I'd like to try to give them all the sustains I can, but that's about all I could think of.
It's hard because I think most people probably have, if they really got down to it. Now I'm thinking most people outside of New York City, because New York and New Jersey and that kind of area is, because they're so, it's not as common to have their own vehicles to travel around. They use, metro, and so they don't tend to stock up big.
Exactly.
And they live in little 400 square foot boxes, I mean, I obviously I'm generalizing New York City, but because there are other areas that are like that. Chicago is very similar, where you have to live in a very small downtown area. You don't have the ability to stock up a lot, but if you focused on it, what I was going to say is, I think it's probably pretty likely most families throughout the United States have a couple of days worth of food, whether they believe it or not. If you scrounge, you'll find a couple of days worth of food, in the cupboards. You'll find an extra thing of pasta. You'll find an extra bag of rice or whatever. And rice will sustain you for a period of time. As long as you have water, you're going to be okay. That's the and even up to the 3 to 5 day time period, you'll be okay. But it becomes a question of comfort. And I think that's probably more what you're alluding to. It's hard to give them any props when they're probably used to a certain level of comfort, and
Yeah.
they haven't prepared for that comfort in any way, you know.
Well, they
You're
could be.
in the middle of a storm, you're not going to go out and just run down the street and get some fresh produce. It's just not going to happen, you know.
Yeah. Well, Cat 5 hurricane or tornado, you need to pretty much be ready to be wiped out.
Yep. Yep. Button down those
Um,
hatches and pray that the storm goes by you. Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
difficult one.
There was a Cat 5 tornado that hit somewhere around, I think it was the southern area of Oklahoma City in about 1999. And I
Mhm.
was driving a truck through there at the time. And I happened to be driving on the road and I was listening to the radio, and and then I had the box cell phone at the time too that my
Oh
boss
yeah.
was calling me on. He was telling me, hey, there's a big bad tornado about to hit that area. Where are you at? And I was like, well, I'm back over here. I just got past Guthrie, I think. I was in Guthrie area. Um, and he said, oh, that's a pretty wide open, flat area. He said, I would try to find an overpass that you can actually park underneath. And he said, I
And
would
just
park
stay
it there.
there. Yeah.
And I'm in a big truck loaded down with vehicles in the back too. So it's a heavy
Yeah.
chunk of metal. So I did that. I parked underneath an overpass, and I went ahead, just waited I think 4, 5, 6 hours. Went in the back and got a couple of Z's. But it was hard because the wind, even in that area, was so bad that it was rocking the whole truck.
Oh
And
wow.
we're talking
Yeah.
about a weighted down semi truck, and it was rocking it back and forth. When the wind subsided and I took off again, I actually slept until the morning, to about 6:30 or so a.m. Took off, the sun's starting to come up, start edging towards Oklahoma City, and off to the right, there's this huge area, to include a auto dealership. That whole area and all the auto dealership was completely just devastated. It looked
Yeah.
like bombs had hit it.
Oh,
So when you're talking about Cat 5, that's the kind that was I
that's
think they called that
destruction.
I think they called that a Cat 5 tornado.
Hmm.
We're talking like lots of people died. It leveled entire areas of neighborhoods of houses.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's that, you get a Cat 5 hurricane or tornado.
Here's an interesting one for you. That your story reminds me a lot of. There was I went through the search and rescue lost person behavior course. It was a 2 or 3 day course, and one of the scenarios that they brought up was this thing that happened in Oklahoma, ironically, where it was a chemical plant that something happened. There was some lack of planning or whatever it wound up being, and there was a massive explosion. And next to this chemical plant, there's these trailer parks and home type of
Yeah.
environments. And
Yeah.
if you go back and you look, you can actually read it in the news about this bomb that occurred. It wasn't a bomb, it was an explosion that happened at this chemical plant. And it basically wound up killing like a couple or 100 people or something like that. And that was weeks of trying to find people in their own homes, because their
Yeah.
homes were all destroyed by this massive explosion. And it's just, when you see something like that and you comprehend what the difficulty would be of coming back from something like that. It's amazing that some people don't just say, just level it
Yeah.
and move on.
Yeah. I quit.
Yeah, I quit. I move on from this. How early before a storm hits do you think a family or a community should start preparing, or just an individual should start preparing?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about next was, how soon is too soon?
Hmm.
Well, I mean,
How about today?
yeah, I
You
mean,
start with today.
let's start like right now. I think that's the easy answer.
Yeah.
Because like the Boy Scout motto, be prepared. And it's, it goes towards talking about Elsie's attitude, this
Hmm.
in the scenario, this character's attitude throughout the whole thing. Like you said, this is their background. This is what I love about this scenario that you created, is like, here's these people, they're real people in real backgrounds. I
Yeah.
mean, they're not real people, but it's a
But it's a
background.
real background. It
Yeah,
is. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
it is a real background, because I've met a lot of these people from the cities.
Yeah.
And it is like you said. I mean, they live in an apartment and they can just go downstairs to the local
Yeah.
corner bodega and pick themselves up a salad or a sandwich or a pizza or some groceries. And
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
bodegas are like little grocery stores too. I mean, they
Yeah.
got everything you need there. And they got one on every corner in, Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens,
Yeah.
all those areas where there's built up urban areas. There's a lot of them. So nobody in those areas, I don't ever see that type of, like you said, they have mass transportation, et cetera, et cetera. So when you pull somebody from that kind of background and mindset out into a broader world, and these other types of situations are occurring, they don't have a preparedness, this type anyway, they don't have this type of preparedness mindset
Yeah.
very well. So that they're not going to say, they're not going to think, yes, we should start preparing today for these types of scenarios. And somebody needs to take them up by the hand and tell them, hey, you're living in a different area now. And this is another thing where I think the Gen Xers take a little bit more charge and control, a little bit more leadership, and be as gentle and persuasive as about it as you can.
Very,
Yeah.
very good point.
Because you don't want to turn these people off, because when I was younger and I was, doing some of my things, if you came up to me and told me that I needed to start saving money, or I need to start doing this or doing that, I've always been pretty sensitive. So if you don't say it in the right way and you say it in the wrong way, and I feel kind of like almost offended about it, I'm just going to shut you off.
Yep.
But how early before the storm hits would be the best time to start preparing? The Boy Scout motto also is pack light, freeze at night, and it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I told Nisha wonders why I buy an extra bag of rice or an extra thing of ramen noodles and oatmeal.
Yeah.
About once a month. I'm telling you, we got probably close to 2 or 3 months worth of rice, ramen, and oatmeal.
Yep. Yep.
And I can live off that stuff for weeks, just like we did when we were in college.
Yeah.
So start planning and prepping for it now. And ever since the deep freeze that we had, we still haven't gotten it, but we're going to get a generator, because that deep freeze scenario is one of the things that caused us to plan and prep more. Well, it was a few things. First of all, it was you and I talking about the project, the deep freeze, and the COVID thing. All of that was going on. Next thing I know, Nish was coming back home one day, and I had all my gear out, and I'm organizing it and making sure, I'm loading up ammo in magazines and stuff. I'm doing the whole 9 yards. I did it for a few straight days before I got everything pretty straight. But the deep freeze was our scenario that I correlate to this scenario you talk about, where we experienced, like, we closed off about 60% of our house, so we only had to heat up about 40% of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we never knew when the power was going to be back on. When the power came back on, I cranked up the heater. I turned on the stove, all that kind of stuff, because you had maybe half an hour to heat your house up again before the power was off again. And the temperature outside was 10 degrees.
Yeah. Right.
So I know that we had neighbors in houses twice as big as ours, and their bill went through the roof that month. And they have such a roomy house, they couldn't close off a lot of the portions of their
Oh, they had
houses.
like
So
open floor plan type of thing. Yeah.
yeah, we have a plan where I can shut off literally. I mean, it's open in half of the house, but from that I can like shut off the other half.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
good. That's
that
good.
ended up being pretty good because we could stay right here in our area with uh, our master bedroom, our master bath, and our living area. In this area right here, we could try to keep warmer. And the rest, I bet you if you went through that area where I built like a tarp, and you went on the other side, I bet you the other side of the house was maybe 40, 50 degrees.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah. In
Yeah.
our side, it never got below 60, I don't think so. But anyway, to answer your question, how soon is now? You need to start planning and prepping as soon as you can
Soon
for
as you
any
can.
contingency, but
Yeah.
especially if you see a storm coming, start like trying to track it ASAP.
I always find it interesting how these the responses, in again in my part of my neck of the woods, my goodness, a couple days before it's like people are crazy. They just go to the store and they just buy everything, and they empty the shelves. And
Mhm.
it's like if you would have just been a little bit more prepared ahead of time, there wouldn't be this massive scramble happening at, right before a storm, which causes panic. There's no, that's just, we're just such a country of plenty. There's really no need for that. But,
Yeah,
all we can do, Ed, is get the word out and try to
yeah.
get more people thinking about it. I think that's it.
Well, that's a problem with America is that, and we brought this up before, is like we have so much stuff and it's so readily accessible most of the time that we don't have a preparedness mindset, and we don't have a creative and inventive mind anymore. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I've got this situation right now, and I've got a pocket knife.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. What
need
am
to,
I going to do? Yeah.
and uh, the three-letter acronym that I learned in military intelligence for that covers almost everything is FIO, FIO, figure it out.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it, it you're on your own. Yo-yo, you're on your own. You need to figure it out. Yo-yo, FIO, you're on your own. You need to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Great acronyms for sure. Yeah. So let me ask you one more question before we finish up the show, and that's what are some activities? I have an idea that I think would be really good for people, but what are some activities that the family could have done to prepare themselves better?
Well, they could have tried to get their communications in line a little bit better for sure. Make sure they're all tracking, communicate with each other. Like, are you going to school today? Are you going to work today?
Yeah.
The storm is coming. Do we have, the main routes are going to be chalked up? Are there alternate routes?
Alternate routes. Very good. Yep.
Are we prepared? What do we have? Do we need to bug out of here real quick? Are we going to shelter in place? Okay, it's cat 3 or 4 now. Oh wait, it may or may not be coming towards us. Oh wait, yeah, it's going to be cat 5 and it's coming towards us. I don't care where you're at or what you're doing. If you've got your varsity volleyball game or whatever, you need to get
Get
back to the
home.
house because
We're getting
we're
out.
packing the
Yeah.
stuff and we're heading up this alternate route.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know about like exercises because it's not like, you have a game like Twister where, you can play a dice and roll game and spin the board and right hand on the red circle
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
drive your mental planning and preparedness. But we've brought up those books before, like the survival
Mhm.
guides and stuff like that. Some of them have activities in there
Yeah.
that get your mind lubed. So Going to that last question that you got, what are some activities they could have done with the family to prepare themselves better? I think the main thing is communicate
That's a
and
good
just a
point.
little bit of planning.
Yeah. I have one interesting thought that I've been meaning to try in the family. And that is I would love to get to that point. Now maybe a category 5 is maybe not necessarily the right time to think stay at home or shelter in place. But in many situations, it's just simply the lack of power or the loss of power that causes challenge for people. So what I thought about doing is maybe on a quarterly basis in our house, and I'm thinking I'll do this for the new year. Each quarter, I'll just plan a weekend and just say it's coming this weekend. You don't know when it's going to happen, but I'm going to shut off the power
I
in our
wouldn't even
house.
tell them. I wouldn't even.
Well, I
Tell 'em.
might the first time I might not do that, but they'll know it's coming at some point in time,
just
So
just hit the main power
that's exactly what I'm going to do.
thing and
Yeah.
act like something tripped it
I don't know.
and
We
be
just
like,
don't have power. We just don't have power. Yeah.
you know, there's a good exercise. See how many of them can go to the garage or where you've got the power box that will figure out, oh, it's the
Yeah.
main power, and turn it back
Just
on.
flip it back on.
I'll be like,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But then the alternative is I would say, nope, this is purposefully turned off. You can't turn it back on. How do we get power? How do we get heat? How do we get water? How do we, all these different, because we're on a well. We're on a well, which requires electricity to get the water up out of the ground. So if
oh, well.
electricity goes out in our house, we got no water coming up out of the ground, right? So that's a challenge for our scenario.
So was
And
that well part of a homesteading type plan, or is that just the
no,
way
no,
that house has always been?
that's the way this house has always been. Yeah.
Okay.
That's one of those things. That's one of the reasons why water is so important to me, and why, it's hard for me to imagine. What I've been doing primarily is focusing on, now we have a water, almost like a spring out the back of our property. So there's water back on the backside of our property. It's not clean water. So that's why I have alternative means to clean the water, to purify and filter the water. But but that's also why I stock up so much water in my house, because I'm like, geez, if I lose power, I'm without water or access to water,
Yeah.
So that's it's very important for us.
That I don't care who you are, where you're from. I can't harp on that enough. Water is a big deal. And if
Water is huge.
if you're without water for 3 to 5 days, you're going to be miserable. And we're not talking about water to take a shower. We're not talking about having even just enough water to put on a rag and wipe yourself down a little bit. We're talking about water to drink.
Just to drink. Yep. That's
And
right.
I got a story about that. Do you want me to share it now?
Yeah. Go for it.
We were doing a border operation. It was going to be what we called a terrain denial operation. We helicoptered into a southwest border region right there on the Mexico border. And we set up 3 teams that were going to be observation posts for any illegals coming through there, because obviously we had teams out in the open that were there to divert them. That was the terrain denial part of it. They were to divert them from just these walk across areas to try to divert them to the point of entry, the POE.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had I was in just the observation type team that was kind of hidden once. And we went in, I think, with a team of 5 or 6. There's 3 teams of 5 or 6. We went in on Blackhawks we early morning hours to avoid detection there. We got dropped off at one location. To get to where we needed to go, we needed to hike about 6 miles.
Mm.
We were going to be out there for 5 or 6 days. Yeah, you had to set yourself up on a hill and all this kind of stuff. We got our stuff out there, and the team is carrying 5-gallon water jugs, carrying them hand by hand, or trying to throw them on your pack. And a 5-gallon water jug is about, I think it's about 70 pounds.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. It's not easy to truck 5 or 6 miles with all the rest of your gear.
Yeah.
We needed that water just to drink.
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot how many of those jugs we had. But first of all, I know that I carried one of them most of the way out there, and I carried the other one most of the way back. But we had a former Army infantry guy with us that while we were out there, he decided to take a couple of field wipes or whatever, and he used a lot of our water doing that. And we literally ran out of most of our water about a day before we actually extracted. So I remember it made the hike back a lot easier because we only had about half of one of those 5-gallon jugs with us. But the rest of that hike it was a summertime day on our hike back. So, you're talking about 95 degrees. And we not only did we drink all of the water in the what that was remaining in the 5-gallon jug, but fortunately we had a medic with us with his huge medic bag because we actually drank his IVs.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And we didn't drink his IVs to be cool or try it. Right. We drank his IVs because we were there, man.
We
were hurting. We were starting to hurt. By the time the helicopters picked us up, we were starting to get dehydrated. And when we did our AAR, or after action review on this, we had part of this was actually a training exercise that was being done by one of the guys that used to be a head RIP school instructor, Ranger Indoctrination Program. So they tried to make it like a 10-day little mini Ranger gut school type gut check. And this was part of the plan of it. We did our AAR after that. I was like, well, here's part of our problem is we had people that thought they could take a little bit of a field shower with our water, and they hadn't been in this situation before. Yeah. They don't realize what the climate is out here, how important water is, and that water is just for drinking. I'm sorry, you don't get a chance to take a bath or shower for the next 5 days.
Yeah. Yeah, so no, that's that it's incredibly important to remember there's a separation between cleaning water and potable water, something to drink,
Yeah. So that's my water story. And ever since then, I've been just like water. Well, that was in 1993 or 94. And then later in 2007, I went back to Operation Iraqi Freedom, and the young troops aren't hydrating properly. They've got plenty of water, but they're not hydrating properly. And whether it's in training in Fort Dix, New Jersey, or out in Iraq or Kuwait, I had to stick a couple of them with IVs because they're like literally falling down. They're dehydrated. I'm like, dude, drink water.
Just drink.
There's points and times where the whole unit will have a formation with their canteen, and they will have forced drinking sessions.
That's good.
Young troops are getting that unprepared.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about troops that are going out partying all weekend and drinking beer. They're stuck on base doing training, or they're stuck on a deployment. So they don't have access to alcohol. We're talking about troops that just won't drink enough.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, there's my rant.
Yeah, that's good. Wiltsie's rants.
One of my rants.
I wanted to still give an opportunity for parting shots if you had any. So what would be your parting shot for today?
My parting shot would be, I hope that you actually copy paste the narrative of this scenario into wherever we're going to upload this so people can actually read along with it.
Yeah.
And this is a really good exercise. I'm glad you brought it up. I think it's very positive and pragmatic, where you have a reasonable scenario that we know not only it will occur sooner or later to almost everybody at least once in your life. And here's your scenario. I think it's a great positive exercise. I think it opened up a lot of great discussion and dialogue. Mm-hmm. And that's my parting shot. Was this and things like this are great practical exercises for I think one of the most important aspects and elements of preparedness, which is mental preparedness,
Yeah.
thinking about these things. And once you see the scenario and everything, you have a better idea of the steps you need to take to prepare for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, for my parting shot, it's interesting. You mentioned at the beginning of the discussion that it sounds like you've been through this before, or like someone you know has been through this before. And it's not necessarily the case. I have talked to people. I remember when I was in Florida, about, I mean, it was just before the pandemic, and there was a big hurricane that was on its way toward the Miami area, and it was heading right for Miami. It was category 4 out in the in the ocean. I think it was in the process of hitting Bermuda or something like that, and it was coming up toward Miami. I was in Miami for only like 2 days, and I remember driving. I was at a customer site, and we were having a meeting, and these guys were scrambling. They were saying, "Look, we don't have time to sit through this training that you're giving us right now. We need to go because this thing is coming toward us."
Yeah.
So that was kind of some of the things that made me start thinking about, okay, what would it be like to go to work, to just keep going to work when there's a big storm coming? If you're new to the area, you just keep going to work, because you don't know what's coming. And these other people were going, "No, I'm getting the heck out of town. I am gone." And so I remember they said, "You need to leave town now." My flight was scheduled for the next day, and they said, "You need to get out of town now." And it was like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And I'm like, okay. So I organized, got my flights changed so that I could leave that evening instead. And the storm was due like 3 o'clock in the morning or something. So I had plenty of time to get out of town. But I was driving back to the airport, and you got to fill up your tank.
Yeah.
You got to fill up your gas tank of a rental car. And I was driving through Miami to get to the Hollywood airport. And oh my gosh, each line that I passed was easily 2 or 3 blocks long. And I was just going, and it was exactly that scene. I'm driving through the streets like Walking Dead. There was, all the shutters were closed. It was I still have pictures actually of as I'm driving through. I'm just driving through, and I'm click, 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 taking pictures of the post office that was completely shuttered, of like restaurants, of everything. It was just completely shuttered, hard metal shutters on their windows because they knew what was coming.
Now, did you get a picture of Anderson Cooper while he was out there? The storm is coming
with a big wind blow. It's blowing wind at him, right? Yeah, with sand blowing all over the place. Anyways, I have an interesting story about him, but I won't say that right now. But anyways, I drive, and I must have passed 5 gas stations, and finally I just said, screw this. I'm just going back to the airport. If they charge me $50 to fill up my tank, I don't care. I'm checking in the rental and getting on a plane.
Yeah.
And as I'm sitting there on the tarmac on the plane, there are a line of all these commercial and Lear jets and just probably 100 planes just waiting to take off. And you could see, and I was taking pictures out on the, toward the east, where you could see the storm. You can see this massive storm coming toward you, and you're like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Anyways, the reason I bring that up is it is a very real thing that happens in those hurricane areas.
Yep.
And all we can do from our perspective is we can try to help people understand it is real, and this stuff does happen. And maybe we don't necessarily need to prepare for hurricane where we are. But there are always other things that we need to prepare for. Winter's here, so winter storms coming, freezing temperatures coming, heat waves in the summer. There always is something that we can be vigilant about and prepare for. So that's my parting shot for today. Another excellent show. Thanks for joining joining
Thanks
me
for
today.
having
And
me.
I appreciate it. And until next time, let's remember to respond well and recover faster. Everybody. All right. Until next time, this is Matt Marshall signing off.
This is Ed Wasson. This is Sparta. Oh, 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 oh. Okay.
Later, Ed.
That was overkill.
That was a lot of fun.